a description of events that occurred on certain points in history. Sometimes the topic will be about situations in sports, gaming, television, film, and YouTube. The announcement of an extremely influential game. The Macworld 1999 Convention, San Francisco, California. Halo, a franchise that sparked changes in first-person gaming. Many saw the Mac operating system as the most important creation at the time, trying to code for games within its capabilities despite the software complications. Gaming is an activity that many people play together. There are several genres of games, along with several combined genres. For example, the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim can be seen as a third and first-person action role-playing game. The option to use either first or third person along with the use of action leads to a more interesting game. There are also several platforms to play on, being the Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, and personal computers. Some platforms have exclusive titles, while others get ports of said titles. In the 1990s, Apple had a very problematic time adjusting to the changing landscape of technology. The Macintosh, their lead product, saw a noticeable decline in sales. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, was criticized for his company's issues. Some technology in the Macintosh made it more difficult to find an appeal to certain consumers. PC gaming began to grow without it, having games like Wolfenstein and Doom releasing on the computer to great sales. Bungie was just one man, Alex Seropian, who developed a game opposite of Pong for free. He found an interest in developing and releasing his own games in all sorts of genres. The first game that Bungie published was Operation Desert Storm, a top-down tank shooter where the player would track down Saddam Hussein over the span of 20 levels. Both Gnop and Operation Desert Storm were released solely for Mac operating systems. Seropian met programmer Jason Jones, and they developed role-playing adventure Minotaur: The Labyrinths of Crete together. They took advantage of the use of AppleTalk so friends on separate computers could communicate and play it together. The amount of sales for the Minotaur were big for the Mac player base, leading to Bungie gaining a significant audience. Minotaur's success led to the development of a sequel. Somewhat into the development of Minotaur's sequel, Bungie shifted its focus to make the first-person shooter Pathways into Darkness instead. Their first journey into the first-person shooter genre, Bungie got great responses for the game. Bungie was going to make a sequel to Pathways into Darkness, but came up with the first-person shooter set in the future, known as Marathon. The game led to a boom in popularity for Bungie, being one of the highest-rated games for the Mac. Finding an intriguing groove, Bungie quickly developed a sequel. Marathon 2 continued to boost Bungie's success, making an advancement into multiplayer gaming with dedicated servers. The game also added more in-depth knowledge of the setting and background of the game's universe. There are several fleshed-out characters throughout this game as well. With even more success, another sequel began to be worked on. With another sequel, Marathon Infinity, Bungie created one of the best first-person shooters for the Mac. Being called the standard of the genre for the operating system, Marathon Infinity proved to be impressive and interesting. There are now capabilities to play levels together, known as co-op, along with multiplayer. Bungie began to work on a new style of gaming, a real-time tactics game known as Myth: The Fallen Lords. The workload on this game created a lot of depth. The intriguing use of multiplayer helped improve the player base for the game. Additionally, this was the first time that Bungie developed for a system outside of Mac, also releasing the game on Windows. The game was so well put together, getting several Game of the Year awards. Myth was sold greatly to a large player base, leading to a new sequel called Myth 2: Soulblighter. The game went more detail-oriented, expanding the universe. The game was highly praised, with Bungie gaining more attention in the industry. Multiplayer was improved significantly and the story was expanded upon. Bungie worked on another game for a little while known as Oni. The third-person action game saw an interesting experience in development. Bungie was forced to move those working on Oni into a smaller office across the country. There was a major project that saw the appeal of several highly touted investors. The project was known as a new marathon sequel. It was also known as the Giant Bloody War Game. It was originally going to be a vehicular combat game, but quickly looked like Myth. Bungie's continued work on Apple devices led to an interest between the two for developing an appealing feature for the Macintosh, also known as the Mac. Apple needed something from an already notable gaming company. Steve Jobs, who had rejoined Apple via buyout of Nextel, was desperate in fixing the company's image. After some small talks, Steve Jobs agreed to show Bungie's new third-person shooter game, Monkey Nuts. I mean Halo. At Macworld 1999 at San Francisco, California, Steve Jobs presented some interesting developments in Apple's technology. Apple's success was showcased by announcing the Macintosh G3, which also showed the Mac OS X server. NetBoot and QuickTime Streaming had examples throughout the show. They also announced the iBook, the company's first laptop. There was also the Airport, a wireless gateway. Jobs also pushed the Mac OS 9 update. A featured showcase, Steve pulled Jason Jones on stage to show Halo running on the Mac OS. With the hundreds in attendance looking in awe, the game already had its classic theme and some of the original characters and vehicles. The physics engine looked incredible, along with multiplayer being showcased, plus physical emotions, or emotes. The last shot of this promotion being the company's logo on an in-game flag. There was no working agreement with Apple besides the exposure to a consumer audience. Due to the constant releases they made, Bungie was starting to go into the red financially. They sold their publishing rights to Take-Two Interactive. Even with selling the rights, Bungie was still in financial turmoil. They were contacted by Ed Fries, who was the lead for Microsoft Game Studios. Fries told Bungie that Microsoft had a plan. Microsoft negotiated with Take-Two to gain Bungie and Halo's publishing rights. Unfortunately, Myth and Oni's publishing kept with Take-Two. Microsoft asked Bungie to work on putting Halo on their next gaming console, the Xbox. On June 19, 2000, Microsoft announced Bungie's acquisition. Halo was now seen as the flagship game for Xbox. Halo was Bungie's first console game, with additional time being necessary to develop the world and landscape. The idea to program select functions for the Xbox's controller made it a little more concerning. Every day they would work on the game, play testing with each improvement. Halo would include co-op and multiplayer, with far more people working on it than any other Bungie game. The game was going to be open world, but they dropped the idea quickly. There were multiple writers working on making a functional story, with some workers sleeping in the office. Halo came out on November 15, 2001 to wide praise. Around 2.5 years after the Macworld announcement, Halo became one of the most important reasons to get Microsoft's Xbox. With online multiplayer, Halo quickly grew to one of the most popular games at the time. Xbox became a great console to play with friends on, making Microsoft clinch their grasp on Bungie. Quickly after the success of Halo, Microsoft requested a sequel to be made. The crew at Bungie took their time to develop a new game, Halo 2, with every person in the studio working heavily. So many people were worried that Halo 2 wouldn't match the success and stature of Halo's first installment. Bungie worked on implementing new features into Halo 2, including the use of Xbox Live for multiplayer and having to backtrack on some big changes. Halo 2 was announced in September 2002, but needed to be worked on for around 2 more years. On November 9, 2004, Halo 2 released with even more success. The use of Xbox Live and the increasing player base made Microsoft demand another sequel. Microsoft planned for the next Halo to be a launch title for their new console, the Xbox 360. Soon after Halo 2's release, Bungie put in the work on starting another sequel for the series. Halo 2's acclaim was insanely high, with critics giving the game very high ratings. Bungie knew they made a wonderful title, pouring out several more multiplayer maps for their constant supporters. There were some complaints about the campaign's length at the time, but many saw Halo 2 as part 1 of a larger story. After working on a new mode called Forge, Bungie fell into a less ambitious work cycle. Their new game Halo 3 came out on September 25, 2007. This was past the Xbox 360 release date, but it did improve the amount of Xbox 360s sold. With each new release, Bungie worked on improving their graphics. Halo 3 was seen as one of the most impressive uses of the Xbox 360's capabilities, also working with an improved Xbox Live service. Halo 3 was a great sequel that followed up on Halo 2's story. Finishing the fight, Halo 3 made over $600 million worldwide within the 4 years that followed. With improved Microsoft server support, Halo retained thousands of players within that span. Bungie started to say that they did not like their working agreement with Microsoft around this time. Microsoft understood these concerns, putting 2 final projects in the Halo franchise with Bungie as the developer. Bungie split their team into 2 separate groups, with one working on Halo ODST and the other on another Halo project. ODST came out around 2 years after Halo 3, on September 22, 2009. There were improvements in the game's design. There was also great strides in fleshing out the ever-expanding universe of Halo. ODST was seen as an interesting idea by Bungie, but wasn't as impressive as any mainline Halo. The game was also the first 2-disc Halo on the Xbox 360, with multiplayer being on a separate disc. Halo ODST was seen as an expansion of the previous title, with many reviewers seeing it as a generic work. ODST's shortcomings were unfortunate for Bungie, but they still had another project with a much larger team. Bungie's last project was Halo Reach, which was their first game with face capture for each major character. Reach continued to evolve the lore of Halo, but Bungie was so prepared to end their working agreement with Microsoft. It had been 10 years at this point, and Bungie desperately wanted to leave. Halo Reach was a swan song, with some of the best writing in the franchise. Forge, multiplayer, and co-op continued to showcase how great Halo was, with thousands playing Reach for the next few years. Halo Reach was Bungie's return to form after ODST, with many 9 out of 10 ratings. The more upsetting tone of the game made it more grounded, leading to more responses by reviewers about the ensemble cast of characters throughout the game. Halo Reach was an amazing final installment for Bungie, with many wondering what would be next from the studio. 343 Studios came in to continue on the franchise with a sequel to Halo 3 in the works. Bungie ended their agreement with Microsoft in 2010, but left Halo with 343 Studios. In the next couple of years, Bungie ran into issues while working on their next game. Even though their goal was to be an individual publisher, Activision showed an intriguing deal. Bungie quickly set up a deal to support their new title Destiny, which came out in 2014. Destiny was Bungie's first game in 4 years and quickly became a success. Activision began to act similarly to Microsoft, demanding a sequel for more profit. Destiny 2 came out in 2017 with an impressive amount of improvements. Soon after, Bungie and Activision cut ties. Bungie supported Destiny 2 with new updates throughout the next 5 years, before Sony swung in with an interesting deal. Now Bungie and Sony have teamed up, with Bungie finally returning to remake Marathon. Halo also had improvements without Bungie, but many people saw the change as a mistake at first. 3 sequels, Halo 4, 5, and Infinite, came out while Bungie worked on Destiny. Now that Bungie is working with Microsoft's competitors, it is difficult to say if they would be interested in partnering with them. Bungie's growth and impact with Halo started with Steve Jobs and the Macworld Conference almost 25 years ago. There will never be another game as inspirational as Halo when it came out in 2001. Thanks for watching this video.